February 2, 1943. In the dimly lit corridors of the Kremlin, Joseph Stalin paces alone, his pipe clenched between his teeth, the weight of a nation's agony etched into his furrowed brow. The telegram arrives like a thunderclap. Field. Marshal Paulus and the remnants of the German Sixth Army have surrendered at Stalingrad. For a man who had stared into the abyss of invasion, who had lost millions to Hitler's relentless onslaught, this moment cracks open a door to something almost forgotten: hope. Stalin's eyes, usually steely and unyielding, betray a flicker of grim satisfaction as he absorbs the news, his mind racing through the ruins of a city that bore his name, now a graveyard for Nazi ambitions. But this victory is no mere footnote in the annals of war. Across the globe, World War II rages with unrelenting fury, from the sands of North Africa, where Allied forces push back Rommel, to the Pacific Islands, soaked in American and Japanese blood. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Union has borne the brunt, its people enduring unimaginable horrors. Villages razed, families torn apart, over 20 million souls already claimed by the conflict. Stalingrad's fall marks the pivot, the moment the tide begins to turn against the Axis juggernaut. Yet as Stalin contemplates his next words to the Red Army, the stakes remain existential. One misstep, and the fragile momentum could shatter, plunging Russia back into darkness. In the shadowed halls of Moscow, Stalin summons his inner circle: Molotov, Beria, the generals, who have clawed their way through the snow and blood of the Volga. It's February 3rd, 1943, and the air hums with urgency as reports flood in. Over 91,000 German soldiers captured, their once mighty army reduced to starving phantoms amid the rubble. Stalin's voice, gravelly from years of revolution and paranoia, cuts through the tension. "Comrades," he begins, his Georgian accent thick. The Red Army has struck a blow that echoes across the world, but beneath the triumph lies a calculated mind, one forged in the fires of purges and betrayals. He knows Stalingrad isn't the end, it's the spark. Far to the west, Allied leaders Roosevelt and Churchill confer in Casablanca, plotting the next phase against Hitler, while in Berlin, Goebbels spins propaganda to mask the disaster. The human cost weighs heavy. Soviet casualties at Stalingrad alone surpass 500,000. Mothers weeping over sons lost in house-to-house savagery. Civilians emerging from cellars like ghosts. Stalin's words, soon to be broadcast, must rally a battered people, turning grief into steel resolve. As he drafts his address, the global chessboard shifts. Japan presses in the east. U-boats stalk the Atlantic. But here, in this frozen crucible, the Soviet leader senses the war's axis tilting. February 4th, 1943. The Kremlin radio studio is cold, the microphones waiting like silent sentinels. Stalin steps forward, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor, and begins to speak directly to the soldiers and citizens of the Soviet Union. His voice, broadcast across the vast expanse of the motherland, carries a rare note of restrained triumph. "Comrades, Red Army men and commanders, men and women partisans, the Battle of Stalingrad has ended in the complete victory of our troops. Our forces have encircled and annihilated 22 enemy divisions, over 300,000 men. The Sixth Army and its commander, Field Marshal Paulus, have laid down their arms." He pauses, letting the words sink in. In kolkhozes from Ukraine to Siberia, families huddled around crackling receivers lean closer. In the frozen trenches outside Leningrad, soldiers pass a single headset from ear to ear, eyes widening. For the first time in nearly 2 years of relentless retreat and slaughter, Stalin does not speak only of sacrifice and endurance. He speaks of victory, of a turning point won with Soviet blood. Yet even in this moment, the dictator's words are measured. He praises the courage of the fighters at the Volga, the resilience of the workers in the rear. But he warns that the enemy remains dangerous. The defeat of the Germans at Stalingrad, he declares, shows that the Red Army is capable of crushing the fascist invaders. The implication hangs in the air. The war is far from over, but the path forward has changed. As the broadcast ends, Stalin returns to his office. Maps cover the tables. Kursk, Kharkov, the distant dream of Berlin. He knows the Germans will strike back, desperate to regain the initiative. The question now is not whether the Red Army can hold, but whether it can seize the momentum and never let go. February 1943 rolls on, and the echoes of Stalingrad ripple outward like shockwaves. In Berlin, Hitler rages in the dimly lit map room of the Wolf's Lair, refusing to accept the scale of the catastrophe. Goebbels, ever the propagandist, declares 3 days of national mourning, but quietly orders the press to downplay Paulus's surrender, claiming the Sixth Army fought to the last bullet. Yet the truth seeps through. For the first time, an entire German field army has been wiped out. The myth of invincibility cracks. Back in Moscow, Stalin wastes no time. On February 23rd, Red Army Day, he issues Order Number 95, a sweeping commendation read aloud to every unit from the Arctic to the Caucasus. His words are sharper now, edged with confidence. The enemy has been dealt a crushing blow. The Red Army has shown it can not only stop the fascist beast, but beat it back. He names the heroes: Trykov's 62nd Army, the stubborn defenders of the tractor factory, and Mamayev Kurgan, the snipers who turned every ruined floor into a killing ground. But he also demands more: faster mobilization, heavier industry, unrelenting pressure. Behind the scenes, the Stavka, the Soviet High Command, gathers around the long tables strewn with maps. Zhukov, Vasilevsky, and Rokossovsky argue over the next move. The Germans are reeling. Army Group Don is shattered. Von Manstein scrambling to stabilize the line in the Donbass. Stalin listens more than he speaks, a rare restraint born of hard lessons. He knows the Wehrmacht is wounded but far from broken. Spring will bring mud, then the inevitable counterstroke. The question burning in every mind: can the Red Army turn one great victory into an unstoppable advance? Spring thaws the Russian steppe in March 1943, turning roads into quagmires and battlefields into seas of mud. The Red Army surges forward, Kharkov retaken, Belgorod in Soviet hands, pushing the exhausted Germans westward in what feels like the long-awaited counter-offensive. Soldiers who survived Stalingrad march with a new fire in their eyes, singing as they advance, convinced that the road to Berlin has finally opened. In the Kremlin, Stalin watches the reports with guarded optimism. He has learned the hard way not to trust early gains. 2 years earlier, overconfidence had cost millions. Now he demands caution from his generals, even as Zhukov and Vasilevsky press for deeper thrusts. Intelligence pours in. Hitler has appointed von Manstein to command the Southern Front, the brilliant Prussian aristocrat who once masterminded the French campaign. Manstein is already regrouping, pulling elite SS panzer divisions from across Europe, Leibstandarte, Das Reich, Totenkopf, hardened formations that had been refitting in France. Stalin pores over the maps late into the night, pipe smoke curling around the lamps. He senses the trap forming. The Germans are not retreating in panic. They are shortening their line, trading space for time, preparing to strike back when the ground hardens. In quiet moments, he speaks to his closest aides with uncharacteristic candor. They will try to take revenge for Stalingrad, and they will choose the place. Across the front, Soviet commanders celebrate premature victories, unaware that the Wehrmacht's deadliest armor is massing in the shadows. The euphoria of February is giving way to a far more dangerous summer. July 5th, 1943, the dawn breaks hot and still over the rolling fields around Kursk, the largest armored battlefield the world has ever seen. From concealed positions, thousands of German tanks, new Tigers and Panthers, their long barrels, glinting in the early light, lurch forward with a deafening roar. Operation Citadel has begun. Hitler's desperate gamble to pinch off the Soviet salient, erase the shame of Stalingrad, and wrestle back the initiative on the Eastern Front. In Moscow, Stalin receives the first frantic reports by telephone. He does not panic. For months he has waited for this moment, arguing fiercely with Zhukov and Vasilevsky against premature offensives, insisting the Red Army dig in and bleed the Germans dry. Now the trap is sprung. Deep echelons of defenses, minefields layered upon minefields, anti-tank ditches, hidden gun emplacements stretch for hundreds of kilometers. Soviet soldiers, faces blackened with summer dust, grip their rifles and wait in the heat, knowing the storm is coming. At Prokhorovka on July 12th, the clash becomes apocalyptic. Over 1,500 tanks collide in a swirling chaos of fire and steel, the greatest tank battle in history. T-34s charge headlong into the vaunted Panthers, ramming when ammunition runs low. Crews fighting to the death amid burning wrecks. The air reeks of diesel and scorched metal. The ground trembles for miles. Stalin follows every dispatch, chain smoking through the nights. When the reports finally confirm that the German spearheads have been blunted, that Citadel has stalled amid catastrophic losses, a quiet satisfaction settles over him. The Wehrmacht has thrown its best punch and come up short. For the first time, the Red Army holds not just the line, but the upper hand. August 1943, the smoke over Kursk has barely cleared when the Red Army unleashes its long-planned summer offensives. Operation Kutuzov in the north, Operation Rumyantsev in the south, twin hammers aimed at smashing what remains of the German center and south. Orel falls on August 5th, Belgorod soon after. Kharkov, the city that changed hands 4 times in brutal fighting, is finally liberated on August 23rd after weeks of house-to-house slaughter. In the Kremlin, Stalin receives the victory salutes with a growing sense of inevitability. Telegrams flood his desk. Thousands of guns firing in Moscow to mark each liberated city. The first such salutes of the war. He stands at the window overlooking Red Square as the thunder rolls across the capital, watching the searchlights pierce the night sky. For a man who has demanded nothing but sacrifice for 2 agonizing years, these celebrations feel almost foreign, yet he allows them, knowing the people need to taste victory. On August 23rd, as Kharkov is secured, Stalin dictates a new order to the nation. Broadcast that evening, his voice carries a tone the Soviet people have rarely heard: unmasked confidence. The Battle of Kursk, he declares, has ended in the complete defeat of the Germans. Our troops have not only repulsed the enemy's offensive, but have themselves gone over to the offensive and are driving the Hitlerite forces westward. He speaks of the invincible strength of the Red Army, of the inevitable doom awaiting the fascist invaders. No longer is he pleading for endurance. He is promising retribution. In private, however, Stalin's gaze is already fixed far beyond the immediate horizon, on the Dnieper River, on Ukraine's rich grainlands, on the borders of 1941. The war has turned irrevocably. The question now is how far and how fast the Red Army can push before the final reckoning. Autumn 1943, the Red Army storms across the Dnieper River in a series of daring night crossings, soldiers wading chest-deep through icy currents under murderous fire, clinging to makeshift rafts and pontoons. By November 6, Kiev, the ancient mother of Russian cities, occupied for over 2 years, is liberated in a lightning assault. Church bells ring out across the reclaimed capital of Ukraine for the first time since 1941. In Moscow, the victory salute that night is the loudest. Yet 324 guns fire 24 thunderous volleys, shaking windows across the city. Stalin stands again at his Kremlin window, watching the sky blaze with tracers. This time, something closer to a smile touches his face. He turns to his aides and says quietly, "Now the enemy will learn what it means to fight on his own soil." On November 7th, Revolution Day, he addresses the nation from the Bolshoi, lit a balcony before a sea of red banners and exhausted, exhilarated faces. His words ring out clearer, stronger than any time since the dark days of 1941. The Red Army has driven the German invaders from 2/3 of our occupied territory. The strategic initiative is now firmly in our hands. The defeat of the German fascist troops is inevitable. He speaks of the coming winter not as a season of suffering, but as a weapon. Factories in the Urals churn out T-34s faster than ever. American Lend-Lease trucks rumble along new roads. Young men and women flood recruitment centers. eager now not just to defend, but to avenge. In Berlin, Hitler dismisses generals, rants about betrayal, and clings to fantasies of wonder weapons. But on the Eastern Front, his armies retreat, burning villages as they go, knowing the reckoning draws nearer with every kilometer lost. Stalin returns to his maps. The next prizes glow in red pencil: the Baltic states, Belarus, the borders of Poland. The road to Berlin stretches ahead, long, bloody, unforgiving, but for the first time, it feels like a road the Soviet Union will walk to the end. Late November 1943, Soviet reconnaissance. Plane streaks low over Tehran, its pilot banking sharply to avoid Allied anti-aircraft fire. On the ground below, in the heavily guarded Soviet embassy compound, Joseph Stalin steps out of his armored Packard for the first time on foreign soil since the revolution. The Big Three conference, Stalin, Roosevelt, Churchill, has begun, the first time all three leaders meet face to face. The air is warm, a stark contrast to Moscow's biting frost. But the atmosphere inside the conference room is anything but relaxed. Stalin arrives with quiet authority, dressed in his simple marshal's uniform, his presence commanding despite his short stature. Roosevelt, wheeled in due to his polio, greets him warmly. Churchill, cigar in hand, offers a wary smile. They all know what is at stake. The shape of the post-war world is already being sketched in the margins of military strategy. Stalin's mood is markedly different from the desperate days of 1941, when he had begged for a second front. Now, with the Red Army rolling westward and the Wehrmacht in full retreat, he speaks with the confidence of a man who holds the strongest cards. He presses Roosevelt and Churchill relentlessly. When will the Western Allies finally open a real second front in France? The promises of 1942 and 1943 have come to nothing. Soviet blood has paid for every mile regained. Roosevelt, seeking to bind Stalin to the post-war order, offers assurances 1944 will see the invasion. Churchill, more cautious, pushes for operations in the Mediterranean, but Stalin will have none of it. His voice is calm, almost sardonic. We are not asking for your help. We are simply asking you to keep your word. In private sessions, he extracts the commitment he has waited years for. Operation Overlord will launch in May 1944, alongside a supporting landing in southern France. As the conference closes on December 1st, Stalin allows himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The war has turned not just on the battlefield, but in the halls of diplomacy. The Soviet Union is no longer a supplicant. It is an equal, and soon, perhaps more. January 1944, the snow lies deep around Leningrad, a city that has endured 900 days of siege, starvation, shelling, bodies frozen in the streets. On January 27th, the thunder of artillery rolls not inward, but outward. 224 guns fire a triumphant 24-volley salute from the Peter and Paul fortress. The blockade is shattered. Red Army troops link up across Lake Ladoga, and the last German guns fall silent. In Moscow, Stalin receives the news with a nod that betrays deeper emotion than most dare to notice. Leningrad, Petrograd of the Revolution, cradle of Bolshevik. Power has survived because of the unbreakable will of its people and the sacrifices of armies that bled the Germans white on every approach. That night, fireworks burst over the Neva for the first time in years, and survivors weep openly in the streets. Stalin drafts his order of the day with deliberate care. Broadcast on January 28th, his voice carries across the ether with unmistakable finality. The heroic defenders of Leningrad, by their stubborn resistance, have not only saved their city but have contributed decisively to the radical turn in the course of the war. The enemy's hopes of capturing Leningrad have been buried forever. He goes further than ever before. For years, his speeches had warned of hardship ahead, of the need for iron endurance. Now, in the privacy of the Kremlin, he tells his generals plainly, the initiative is ours. We will not let it slip. Operation Bagration, the colossal summer offensive that will eviscerate Army Group Center, is already taking shape on the planning tables. Across the Channel, Allied preparations for D-Day accelerate. Spurred by Stalin's relentless pressure at Tehran, the Soviet leader lights another pipe and stares at the map. From Leningrad to the Black Sea, the front is moving. The war that once threatened to swallow the motherland whole is now carrying the red flag inexorably westward, toward East Prussia, toward Warsaw, toward the heart of the Reich itself. June 6, 1944. Dawn breaks grey and choppy over the Normandy coast. Thousands of Allied landing craft plow through heavy seas toward beaches codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Paratroopers drop behind the Atlantic Wall. Gliders crash land in hedgerow country. The long-promised Second Front has finally opened. Operation Overlord, the greatest amphibious invasion in history. In Moscow, Stalin is woken early with the news. He dresses quickly, moves to the map room, and listens as his intelligence officers read the first intercepted reports. For once, there is no skepticism in his voice. He nods, lights his pipe, and says simply, "So they have begun. The commitment extracted at Tehran is being honored." Roosevelt and Churchill have kept their word. 3 days later, on June 9th, Stalin issues a public statement unlike any before it. Broadcast across the Soviet Union, he declares, "The history of warfare knows no other undertaking comparable in scale, breadth of conception, and masterful execution to this invasion across the English Channel. The Allies have carried out a brilliant operation." He praises the courage of the American, British, and Canadian troops, calls it a mortal blow to the Germans. In private, he tells Zhukov, now Hitler will have to fight on two fronts in earnest. His days are numbered, but Stalin has not been idle. Even as Normandy burns, the Stavka finalizes the plans for Operation Bagration, the colossal offensive. In Belarus, time to coincide with the Western Allies' foothold. 4 Soviet fronts, over 2 million men, 12,000 tanks and assault guns, masses of artillery that dwarf even Kursk. The target, Army Group Center, the very formation that once stood at the gates of Moscow. Stalin looks at the calendar. June 22nd, 1944, the 3rd anniversary of Barbarossa, will mark the launch. The symmetry pleases him. The Germans will be paid back on the exact day they first struck. June 22nd, 1944. Exactly 3 years to the day since Hitler's armies poured across the Soviet border in Operation Barbarossa. The sky over Belarus erupts in the greatest artillery barrage the world has ever heard. More than 24,000. Guns open fire at once, shells falling so densely that the ground itself seems to boil. Operation Bagration has begun. In the Kremlin, Stalin stands motionless before the huge situation map, hands clasped behind his back, watching as red arrows surge forward across 4 entire fronts. Rokossovsky's 1st Belarusian front smashes through the German line near Bobruisk. Cherniakovsky's troops tear into the north. Bagramian and Tolbukin strike from the flanks. Within days, entire German corps are encircled, their escape routes cut by relentless Soviet armor. By July 3rd, Minsk, the capital of Belarus, the city Stalin had vowed to retake, falls after ferocious street fighting. 30,000 German prisoners are marched through the streets under guard, their heads bowed, while thousands of Soviet citizens line the sidewalks in silence, tears mixing with the dust. Stalin orders the spectacle filmed and shown in every newsreel across the Union. Let them see, he tells his aides. Let every Soviet know what justice looks like. In just 3 weeks, Army Group Center is annihilated. Over 400,000 German soldiers killed, wounded or captured. 28 divisions simply cease to exist. The Wehrmacht's Eastern Front is ripped open. The Red Army advances 400 kilometers in a single month, faster than any blitzkrieg the Germans ever achieved. The Baltic states tremble. Poland's eastern border is reached. Stalin's voice, when he addresses the nation on July 23rd, carries the weight of inevitability. The Red Army has broken the backbone of the German war machine. The hour of retribution has come. We will carry our banners to the very heart of fascist Germany. No more warnings, no more cautions, only the promise of an end In Berlin, Hitler rages, sacks generals, and orders the creation of new fortress cities that will never be built. The Reich is unraveling, and Stalin knows it. The map on his wall now shows the Vistula River, Warsaw, and beyond, Berlin itself glowing faintly in red pencil. August 1st, 1944, Warsaw burns. From the eastern bank of the Vistula, Soviet forward observers watch as smoke rises in thick black columns over the Polish capital. The Polish Home Army, 60,000 poorly armed fighters loyal to the London government in exile, has risen against the German occupiers, expecting the Red Army to sweep in and seal the liberation. In the Kremlin, Stalin studies the reports with cold calculation. Rokossovsky's First Belarusian Front has reached the suburbs of Praga, just across the river, after the lightning gains of Bagration. But the troops are exhausted. Supply lines stretched hundreds of kilometers over ruined roads and railways. German Panzer Corps, freshly transferred from the west after the shock of Normandy, have counterattacked fiercely, stalling the Soviet drive. Stalin makes his decision. He will not order an immediate assault across the Vistula. No bridges, no ammunition dumps, no air support will be rushed to the insurgents. Radio contact with the Home Army is ignored. When Churchill and Roosevelt plead for Soviet aid, airdrops, landing rights for Allied shuttles, Stalin replies with deliberate vagueness. The uprising is a reckless adventure that complicates military operations. In private, his reasoning is brutal and clear. The Home Army answers to London, not Moscow. A free, non-communist Poland rising now would challenge Soviet plans for the post-war order. Better to let the Germans crush the uprising, bleed themselves in the process, and clear the way for a Poland rebuilt under Soviet influence. By October 2nd, after 63 days of heroic, hopeless resistance, Warsaw capitulates. The old city is systematically demolished by German engineers, block by block, a deliberate act of vengeance. Over 200,000 Polish civilians lie dead beneath the rubble. Stalin watches the front stabilize along the Vistula. The pause is costly in time, but it serves his purpose. When the Red Army finally crosses the river in January, it will enter a city already tamed, its anti-communist leadership decimated. The road westward remains open, but on his terms. January 12, 1945, the frozen Vistula River glints under a pale winter sun as the greatest offensive of the war explodes into life. From bridgehead south of Warsaw to the Baltic coast, 4 Soviet fronts, over 2 million men, thousands of Katyushas, T-34s, and heavy IS tanks crash forward in the Vistula Oder operation. The German line, thinly held after the carnage of Bagration and the Ardennes gamble in the west, simply disintegrates. In the Kremlin, Stalin follows the first reports with intense focus. Zhukov's First Belarusian Front smashes through in hours. Konev's First Ukrainian races to outflank from the south. Rokossovsky and Cherniakovsky drive from the north. Warsaw, still smoldering from the ruins of the uprising, is bypassed and falls on January 17, liberated this time not by Polish patriots, but by Red Army troops marching under Soviet banners. The speed is staggering. Day after day, the front line leaps westward, which on January 19th, Poznań encircled, the old 1941 border crossed and left behind. By the end of January, Soviet spearheads reach the Oder River, less than 70 kilometers from Berlin. In just 3 weeks, the Red Army has advanced over 500 kilometers, capturing or destroying entire German army groups. Stalin receives the daily briefings in silence at first, then with a growing sense of finality. He tells his generals, the enemy is finished. He has no reserves left. On February 1st, as Zhukov's tanks probe the frozen Oder, Stalin dictates a new order to be read to every unit. The Red Army stands on the threshold of the fascist lair. The hour of complete victory is near. Forward to the final defeat of Hitlerite Germany. In Berlin, panic grips the Führerbunker. Hitler orders impossible stands, executes officers for retreat, dreams of miracles that will never come. Civilians flee westward in endless columns through snow and ice, terrorized by rumors of what the advancing Soviets will bring. The Reich that once stretched from the Volga to the Atlantic is now reduced to a shrinking pocket around its capital. Stalin lights his pipe and studies the map one more time. The Oder is crossed in places. Bridgeheads are held. The final push, the Battle of Berlin itself, lies only weeks away. February 1945, the Crimean resort town of Yalta, its palaces spared the worst of war, becomes the stage for the second and final meeting of the Big Three. Stalin arrives by armored train, then motorcade, his security tighter than ever. He is in his element, hosting on territory his armies have reclaimed, the red flag flying over the Livadia Palace, where Roosevelt, visibly frail, his face gaunt, will spend his last major conference. The talks begin on February 4. Stalin sits at the round table in his marshal's uniform, pipe in hand, eyes sharp. The map of Europe lies open between them, and the Soviet leader knows the facts on the ground speak louder than any argument. Zhukov's and Konev's armies are already across the Oder, shelling Kustrin, less than a day's march from Berlin. The Western Allies, bogged down in the Hurtgen forest and the Ardennes snow, have only just reached the Rhine. Stalin concedes little and demands much. Poland's borders are redrawn far to the west, swallowing German lands to compensate for territories taken in the east, now firmly Soviet. The Lublin Committee, Moscow's chosen Poles, will form the basis of the post-war government. The London exiles are sidelined. On Germany itself, Stalin pushes for dismemberment and massive reparations, his voice calm but unyielding. Roosevelt, seeking Soviet entry into the war against Japan, offers concessions. Churchill fights rearguard actions but knows the tide has turned. In quieter moments, Stalin walks the palace terraces overlooking the Black Sea, the same waters where he once vacationed in peacetime. He allows himself to imagine the end. Red Army banners over the Reichstag, the fascist beast crushed forever. When the conference closes on February 11th with the Yalta Accord signed, Stalin returns to Moscow convinced he has secured not just victory in war, but the foundations of Soviet power for generations. Back in the Kremlin, the final plans for the assault on Berlin are already being refined. The hourglass is running out for the Third Reich. April 16, 1941, the night sky over the Oder River ignites in a man-made dawn. Thousands of searchlights stab upward, then tilt forward in a blinding wall of light, disorienting the German defenders on the Silo Heights. At 4 a.m. Moscow time, 2 hours earlier local, the thunder begins. Over 9,000 Soviet guns, Katyushas, and heavy mortars open the Berlin operation with the most concentrated barrage of the war. In the Kremlin's map room, Stalin stands flanked by Zhukov and Konev. Their faces lit by the glow of situation lamps. Telephone lines crackle with the first reports from the front. Zhukov's first Belarusian front, attacking straight toward the capital, slams into prepared defenses, flooded lowlands, minefields, tiered artillery positions manned by whatever scraps the Wehrmacht and SS can muster. Progress is measured in blood-soaked meters. Konev, commanding the first Ukrainian front to the south, senses opportunity. His tank armies probe for weaker seams, eager to outflank and reach Berlin first. Stalin listens to both marshals, his expression unreadable. He has deliberately fueled their rivalry, telling each privately that the prize of Berlin will go to whoever arrives first. Now as casualties mount on the Silo Heights, he quietly authorizes Konev to swing northward, turning the assault into a race. By April 18th, the heights are breached. Soviet tanks pour through the gaps, churning westward across the Brandenburg Plain. Refugees clog the roads, old men, women, children, fleeing the oncoming storm. In the Führerbunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler marks imaginary divisions on his maps, screaming orders that no longer reach anyone. Stalin returns to his office, lights another pipe, and stares at the latest aerial photographs. The Reichstag, the Brandenburg Gate, the jagged skyline of a city already scarred by years of bombing. The final circle is closing. He knows the cost will be horrific, tens of thousands more. Soviet lives for those last 30 kilometers. But the war that began with Moscow in flames will end with Berlin in ruins, and he will be the one to dictate the terms. April 25, 1945, on a shattered bridge over the Elbe River near Torgau, American and Soviet soldiers meet for the first time, shaking hands, embracing, firing flares into the spring sky. Patrols from the US First Army and the First Ukrainian Front have linked up, slicing what remains of the Reich in two. The war in Europe is entering its death throes. In the Kremlin, Stalin receives the photographs hours later. Grinning GIs trading cigarettes with Red Army men, toasting with captured cognac. The stars and stripes beside the hammer and sickle. He studies them in silence, then sets them aside. That evening, Stalin appears on the mausoleum balcony beside his marshals, Zhukov, Rokossovsky, Konev, the men who turned the tide. Searchlights sweep the sky. Fireworks burst in cascading red and gold. When the victory salute begins, 30 volleys from 1,000 guns. The ground trembles beneath the feet of the multitude. Stalin raises his hand in salute, his face illuminated by the flashes. The people below roar his name again and again until it echoes off every stone. Later, in the silence of his Kremlin apartment, he pours a modest glass of Georgian wine and sits alone. The maps are rolled away. The telephones have stopped ringing. 27 million Soviet citizens, soldiers and civilians alike, will never see this day. Cities lie in ashes, villages erased, families shattered forever. Yet the motherland endures. The enemy that reached the very gates of Moscow has been driven back and destroyed in its own lair. Stalin sets the glass down untouched. He allows himself one quiet sentence, spoken to no one. We have won. The war in Europe is over. But for the man who steered the Soviet Union through its darkest hour, the turning at Stalingrad now feels like a lifetime. Ego, a spark that grew into the fire that consumed the fascist beast. The cost was beyond measure, the victory absolute. June 24th, 1945. The rain falls in heavy sheets over Red Square, turning the cobblestones dark and slick, but no one leaves. Hundreds of thousands pack the vast plaza, shoulder to shoulder, soaked to the skin, waiting for the moment they have dreamed of for 4 unimaginable years. At precisely 10 in the morning, the drums roll. Zhukov, mounted on a white stallion, rides out from the Spassky Gate, his uniform gleaming despite the downpour. Behind him march the victors, columns of men from every front, every republic, their boots striking the stones in perfect unison. Regiment after regiment passes the mausoleum, the guardsmen who held Moscow, the Siberians who bled at Stalingrad, the tank crews from Kursk, the infantry who stormed the Silo Heights and raised the banner over the Reichstag. Then comes the ritual no one will ever forget. 200 captured German standards, battle flags of the Wehrmacht and SS, torn from the ruins of Berlin, are carried forward. At the foot of Lenin's mausoleum, the soldiers pivot sharply and hurl them downward one after another, onto the wet stone in a growing heap of muddied silk and broken eagles. The crowd roars with a sound that shakes the Kremlin walls. High on the mausoleum, Stalin stands motionless in his greatcoat, rain dripping from the peak of his cap. He watches the flags fall, his expression carved from granite. Beside him, the marshals and generals salute. Molotov, Beria, the Politburo members stand in silent rank. For once, no speeches are needed. The gesture says everything. The enemy that set out to erase the Soviet Union has itself been erased. When the parade ends and the last notes of the Internationale fade into the rain, Stalin descends the steps slowly. A young lieutenant, face still bandaged from wounds taken in Berlin, steps forward and salutes. Stalin returns the salute, then places a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. No words are exchanged, but the soldier's eyes fill. Later, in the silence of his office, Stalin opens a drawer and takes out a small photograph, the telegram from February 2, 1943, announcing the surrender at Stalingrad. He stares at it for a long time, then returns it to the drawer and closes it gently. The war is over. The turning point that began amid the frozen ruins. on the Volga has carried the red flag all the way to the Elbe and beyond. The price was 27 million lives and a nation scarred forever. The victory belongs to them all. July 1945, the Potsdam Conference unfolds in the bombed-out suburbs of Berlin, in a palace that somehow still stands amid the devastation. Stalin arrives by train, stepping onto German soil for the first time, the soil his armies have conquered. He tours the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, walks slowly through the shattered bunker where Hitler ended his life, his boots crunching on broken glass and ash. He says nothing, but his aides notice the faint tightening of his jaw. At the conference table, a new American president, Harry Truman, unknown to Stalin until Roosevelt's death, sits opposite him. Churchill is there for the first half, until election results force his departure. Clement Attlee takes his place. The Big Three is no longer the same. The war in Europe is won, but the world is already fracturing along new lines. Stalin speaks with the quiet authority of a man whose country paid the heaviest price and delivered. The decisive blows. Germany will be divided, occupied, demilitarized. Reparations will flow east, factories dismantled, rail stock shipped to rebuild the Soviet wasteland. Poland's western border is confirmed along the Oder-Neisse line, sealing the shifts agreed at Yalta. On the war with Japan, Stalin reaffirms his promise. Soviet forces will enter the fight in August. In the evenings, Stalin retreats to his heavily guarded dacha outside Berlin. He drinks little, smokes steadily, and thinks of the road that began with that telegram in February 1943, the surrender at Stalingrad. From the brink of annihilation to this, Soviet tanks patrolling the streets of the fallen Reich, Red Army officers saluting in the shadow of the Brandenburg Gate. On August 8th, exactly as pledged, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan. 1 million men pour into Manchuria, smashing the Kwantung Army in days. When the atomic bombs fall on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the end comes swiftly. On September 2nd, Japan surrenders aboard the USS Missouri. Back in Moscow that autumn, Stalin stands once more on the mausoleum as another parade marches past. Veterans now, medals gleaming, eyes hardened by what they have seen and done. The crowds are thinner. Grief lingers beneath the pride. 27 million empty chairs at Soviet tables. Cities to rebuild, wounds that will never fully close. Yet the nation that staggered under Barbarossa's blow in 1941 has emerged as one of the two superpowers of the world. The turning point at Stalingrad, the long, merciless road from the Volga to the Spree, has reshaped history. Stalin descends the steps, disappears into the Kremlin's corridors and closes the door. The war is over. The victory is his and the Soviet people's forever. The cost was beyond imagining. The triumph absolute.